All right, so Kennedy, basically with the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald is the only person that had the motive as well as the opportunity. He did try to shoot a conservative, and he's like a far left, not a far right guy that killed Kennedy. He did kill police officer J.D. Tippit on his way to the Texas Theater where he was apprehended. And then Jack Ruby was just a man who at the right time, because he owned some strip bars, and basically the police officer had his back turned for just a second to make sure that the ambulance could make it out of the garage, and Jack Ruby just turned around and walked in. Because he was a owner of strip clubs, he often had cash on him, so he did carry a handgun with him. And when he saw Oswald, he just tripped and shot him. Well, he didn't trip. I'm talking about mentally. He just, Oswald! And he shot him. And he died in prison. Ready for the next slide? Turn in your thought question if you want to up here and make sure you get something to wipe off the desk. Uh-oh. So then we have LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Guys, he was an unrivaled congressman. He was excellent at getting things done and passed. That's him taking the oath of office on Air Force One. There's Jackie Kennedy next to him. And basically his goal was to build a better society where progress is the servant of the neediest. And guys, some people say that absolute power corrupts, but in the case of Lyndon Baines Johnson, absolute power revealed, because he really did have a heart for the down on his luck, the people that were on the fringes of society. He himself grew up dirt poor in Johnson City. He got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed that made it illegal to discriminate for reasons of race, religion, or gender. And basically the way he got it passed is he said it's what Kennedy wanted. Kennedy could have cared less about it. But he used the national grief over the assassination of a president to push the country far forward. And I believe he used the same pen that Truman used to sign the legislation that desegregated the U.S. military. I think he used that same pen to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So basically he launched a war on poverty and his great society. that attack both racial injustice and poverty. Now, how are you going to lift people out? Well, basically, he wanted to expand opportunity and improve the social environment. That's like let's say, I have a trash can, and here in America, we all have the ability to roll up a wad of paper and throw it into the trash can. But the people up here at the front are going to have a lot better chance of getting it in this trash can. Why? Because they're up front. The guys way back and back, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you. So basically what he wanted to do was create opportunities that would help people that were at the back move a little bit closer forward. He created programs like the Job Corps, food stamps, Medicaid, and Medicare for the old and indigent. And he even began the first Head Start programs. So as you can see, a lot of this was about education. Well, were his programs successful? America in 1963, 22% of the population lived in poverty. By 1970, it's down to 12.5. Since then, however, it's raised up a little bit and it's remained at that plateau, despite funds continually flowing to these programs. And by the way, I love LBJ because he's a Texan. And a part of his dreams is just reflective of 1960s America. America was on top of the world. Why not? Let's do it. We can do it. Just the blind confidence. And as you can see, it did a little bit, but it kind of stagnated. Now, what was one of the things that held back the Great Society? Well, the war in Vietnam. We were trying to fight the war on poverty as well as the war in Vietnam at the same time. And basically it was consistent with our policy goals. Basically, America had gone on to containment. We were supposed to stand up strong against communist China, or communism, not just communist China, Russia as well. But we were supposed to stand strong against communism wherever it was. We went in South Korea, we were able to defeat them. And here in Asia, we totally believed that if South Vietnam fell, then basically every other place would fall to communism. It's the domino theory. But we weren't fighting this war to win, we were fighting not to lose. We couldn't bring too many people into South Vietnam, we felt. Why? Well, we had brought a lot of people into Korea, and we had gone up and we had attacked the North. We had invaded the North. MacArthur was sure that our troops would be home by Christmas, when all of a sudden in November, the Chinese launched human waves against us and beat us back. And then we had to fight to claw ourselves back to the former boundaries. And actually, we had started encroaching a little into the north when the peace treaty was signed. Now, unlike today, there weren't really rules for the news teams that were going out and covering this stuff. I mean, you had guys on the ground, embedded with the troops, so they were shooting people getting wounded, they were shooting body bags coming back, they were shooting victims, civilian victims of the war. We don't see that today. They don't show the caskets coming home. They don't show, the most we'll see like camera footage from the cameras we have on our weapons, or from the helicopter view site, target view site. It's all from a distance. It's like a video game. They don't want to remind us that war is an icky thing. Not saying that it's unnecessary, because it is. But it is icky and it is chaotic. And if you're a 17-year-old kid and the draft is hot, and your older brother's friends, some of them have gone off to Vietnam, they haven't come back home. Every day you watch on news because your dad's watching it, and you walk by and you're on the way to the kitchen or whatever. You see American boys under fire, that might be you next year. It would be very scary. That's also another reason why they haven't brought back the draft. And when they do, it looks like they're finally going to start drafting women as well. It's no longer just going to be men. Well, oh, by the way, due to the Tet Offensive on Tet, which is a holiday in Vietnam, even though we said we weren't going to attack, all of a sudden North Vietnam attacked at the same time 48 locations, and they tried to do it conventionally, just like we were fighting them. Indeed, they even invaded the U.S. Embassy in Saigon and held on to the courtyard for 15 minutes. And at every point they were beaten back, including the imperial capital at Hue. And if any of you guys have seen Full Metal Jacket, that scene where they're at Hue, that's during the Tet Offensive. We beat them back. We won. But the news anchors didn't see it that way. And when Walter Cronkite, remember we only had 3 news channels back then. And Walter Cronkite basically said that this war was unwinnable, and it further eroded America's support for it. Now, Johnson, who had basically created a whirlwind of change because of Vietnam, his popularity dropped to 35%. For each Viet Cong killed, we spent about $322,000. For each person on the Great Society program, we spent less than $54. Little difference, just a little. What are the results for Johnson? Well, after just 1 term in office, he announced to a shocked nation that he would not seek and would not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president. It was really sad, because he really did have such an incredible heart. Even though, yeah, he was a scoundrel, he was a liar, he was a dirty rat. Every single bad thing you want to say about him, he was. The only frustrating thing is, every single great thing you want to say about him, he was. And because he had to use the corpse of Kennedy, that's why Kennedy is so fondly remembered, when actually he was down here in Texas trying to build up his sport, because it looked like he wasn't going to win another term as presidency. So remember, before before LBJ was with Kennedy, he was an unrivaled congressman, including Speaker of the House. When he becomes Kennedy's vice president, because Kennedy desperately needed the electoral college votes of Texas, even though Johnson and Kennedy did not get along well. And after Kennedy's death, he assumed the presidency. Oh, and you want to see one of the most controversial election ads ever? And this ad was so controversial for its time that it was only aired once. It's called the Daisy ad. All right, black political gains and late 60s activism. Nationally, you see that the 24th Amendment passed, which eliminates poll taxes. And here in Texas, poll taxes had historically been used to discriminate against voters. A large amount of which were African American. However, there were basically the unwanted peoples. They could be Tejanos, they could be whites, but mainly African Americans. The Civil Rights Voting Act of 1965 was signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson that basically allowed federal marshals to monitor elections. Now, what seems so crazy about federal marshals monitoring elections?
Federal marshals are under control of political people who are being elected.
Well, not only that, but who is supposed to be in control of elections? And this is why we're in the trouble we are right now.
States?
Yeah, the states are in charge of elections. They have always been. Historically, that's it. And having a federal appearance on a state level, but it's bringing justice. Because of this, you start having blacks elected to political positions. Perhaps the most notable for the case of Texas is Barbara Jordan, who was elected first to the state Senate, and by 1972 she's in the U.S. House of Representatives. Indeed, she was one of the power figures in the impeachment of Nixon. And what's cool now is actually the last time I went to UT Austin, there's actually a statue of her there by Hogg Auditorium. Anybody knows anything about UT Austin? Oh, and by the way, she was the first black female from the South elected to the House of Representatives. From 1965 up, blacks began to fight for economic equality, fight against housing discrimination, as well as police brutality. See the rise of the Black Power movement and the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers basically would, if they saw black man getting pulled over by a white police officer, they would go out, they'd get their rifles, and they'd stand back, but basically they'd have their rifles out and visible to the cops that you better not harm this guy. They started food programs to help feed the young in their neighborhoods. And yeah, kind of like BLM today, they were a Marxist group that basically saw community action as power. Here in Houston, you had the People's Party 2, that was their version of the Black Panthers. And one of their leaders, Carl Hampton, was killed in a police raid in the 1970s. Which of course helped to unify the party. Here's you can see a poster for it. You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. Tejano activism during the 1960s. As we talked about during the early 1960s, you had Henry B. Gonzalez getting elected to the San Antonio City Council. Well, in 1965, you saw 5 Hispanics elected to positions of power in Crystal City. Where they formed the Political Association of Spanish-Speaking Organizations, or PASO. In Stark County, the United Farm Workers, which included immigrant laborers, went on strike so they could receive a minimum wage of $1.25 an hour. The Texas Rangers actually did a good job of trying to break up those strikes, break up if they were trying to block the road, break those up. This is where into the show comes a Dallas Tejano. Well, actually, he was born in Mexico. Well, no, he wasn't born in Mexico. He was born in San Antonio. His family fled the Mexican Revolution, walking for a year to get to America. They got to San Antonio. He was born. Then they walked up to Dallas. His dad was taken one night by the Dallas City cops. Nobody ever saw him again. The dad. So a lot of people believe that his father was killed. Anyway, Francisco comes along. He was, even though he worked at an aircraft factory, he was like 6 feet tall. And he was on the boxing team. Because they had a boxing team, between different units that were working to keep up morale. And basically he had learned boxing as a little kid as a way to keep him off the streets. Anyway, he lost his job with with the aircraft factory, but that introduced him to unions. He joined the AFL-CIO, where he was quickly moved up because the AFL-CIO needed more minorities, because they had kept out minorities for so long. He helped ride the buses when they were boycotting the buses in Alabama. He was there at the Selma March. He was out in California with the protests out there against picking grapes, and they sent him here to Texas. And in Texas, he was out at one of these strikes led by the UFW, and he was with a 15-year-old girl, a 14-year-old girl, he's in his 20s, as he has 2 other male friends. And one of his male friends was in the car, and he had a camera. Anyway, the Texas Rangers came, beat the crap out of him, and his film was filming the whole time. And then his friend, the Rangers couldn't see him, but he filmed it, all the stuff that was going on. Then he stopped, ran out of film. He quickly got the stuff and hid the film, put a new cartridge in, or reel. And the Texas Rangers didn't see him. They come, they open up the deal, they rip out the film, exposing it. And so the friend that was taken to jail with Pancho Medrano, basically he gets his teeth knocked out by the Texas Rangers. The girls get a little bruised. But anyway, he gets tried and he gets taken and he's found guilty down in Brownsville. And as he's walking out, his friends come running up to him and say, "Why didn't you show them the film?" Because it was basically his word against the Texas Rangers. And he was like, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, you didn't know we saved the film." So basically they appealed the case. The case goes all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court. And basically it forced the Texas Rangers to change the way they deal with the populace. So he actually helped change Texas. Well, then he moved back up to Dallas. He tries to get a whole Tejano awareness started up here. Nobody really cared. Tejanos in Dallas didn't care at the time. But then something happened. And you might have heard about this case because somebody was recently killed by the Dallas police. And it was the first person in however many years that the Dallas police had killed somebody. Well, he was at the case where the Dallas police killed somebody. Basically who it was a 14-year-old kid out after curfew. Cop pulls him over. And of course he's kind of being a jerk to him. And he tells the kid, "Hey, let's play Russian roulette." And spins the revolver wheel, puts it up to the kid's head, pulls the trigger, and it blew his head off. Whoa. Well, he used that to raise, well, that happened in 1972, uses that all of a sudden, now he has a cause célèbre. Basically, he builds a political machine that is still around today. His grandson is on the Dallas City Council, and his grandson's actually a nice guy, even though he wouldn't give me an interview. And they don't like the fact that I call it a political machine, even though it is a political machine. Basically, he's the head. Y'all know where Farmers Market is? Downtown? It's a really weird, construed, drawn area. But a large part of what he represents is that housing that's down in Farmers Market that they're rebuilding. And I think it spread some into the Cedars. Don't cry. Governor Connolly in the late 1960s states politics. Okay, in the wake of Kennedy's death, a lot of people go and vote for Connolly. Connolly was in the car. Indeed, he was wounded, whereas Kennedy was killed. He was wounded. Part of that magic bullet theory. And he gets more than 75% of the votes. He wants to expand our community college and university systems, increasing faculty pay and construction. So before you cheer him too loudly for being on board, he starts to go against some of LBJ's Great Society programs. I like especially speeding up of the integration of schools. And by the 1970s, he joins the Republican Party. Oh, and by the way, the death of the assassination of John F. Kennedy is probably one of the best things that could have happened to Dallas. Because of that, our mayor, who was one of the founders of Texas Instruments, Erickson, basically did not want Dallas to be remembered as the city that killed Kennedy. So he did stuff like he ordered the integration of our schools much quicker than other areas of the state. He funded into building up our libraries as well as our school system. That's why we have an incredible downtown library. We have it. We also have Senator Ralph Yarborough, who's representing us at the U.S. Senate. Unlike many Democrats, he voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Both acts that if it hadn't been for the Republican vote, they wouldn't have passed. And particularly because of those two votes, you start to see a division between state Democrats and national Democrats. Because there are a lot of conservative Democrats that want to keep things like they were. There's a lot of liberal Democrats that want to push things forward. What does that do here in Texas? It strengthens the Republican Party. Oh, and by the way, I would love it if everybody could take, there's a whole poppycock section in your book about the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy, argued by historians, is a lie. It talks about how Nixon usurped the Democrat Party. And basically the modern day Republican Party is the old no, sorry, not that way.
Wait, that's not true?
No, what, the Southern strategy?
That the Republicans were Democrats before?
No. Even though you want to know something weird and cool, the same guy who started the Democrat Party, Martin Van Buren, started many years later the Free Soil Party, which became the Republican Party. But Ralph Yarborough did have a heart for the downtrodden, did want to help things out. He was a liberal Democrat. And I think this might be the last one of that. Yep. So, you want to start the next lecture or say, Galloway, it's almost Thanksgiving. We're not going to have to be here Monday. We're all going to go to, did y'all know that Free Play was open up? Do y'all know what Free Play is?